The first Metroid game was a revelation on the NES. Sure, it still told most of the story in the manual like other games in that era, but it also had some impressive atmospheric storytelling within the simplistic 8-bit graphics, and the music still stands the test of time, as it's been remixed in basically every series entry since. That intro specifically is still one of the most memorable moments in gaming history, with the mysterious bounty hunter hero and that iconic musical stinger indicating you can take control now. And it solidified Samus Aran herself as a gaming legend, as she was one of the first female badasses in gaming culture. Right up there with Ms. Pac-Man, of course. Though no one knew yet that Samus was a her, but we'll get to that. Anyway, in a time where games like Pac-Man took place on a single reused screen, and Super Mario taught you to just run right and never look back, Metroid mixed things up with a simple concept. Your path forward is blocked, so look around and find an alternate route. It's a game that broke the mold of the average adventure game in a way that wouldn't be matched until its own sequels. It was also maybe a little too ahead of its time for the NES, because that original game is a confusing mess to try to go back to now. Welcome back to another critical analysis of one of my favorite game series. But this time I'm going to split it up into a series of videos because that Ratchet & Clank retrospective kind of broke me. And I don't think I ever would have been able to put this out if I tried to fit all my thoughts on all 4 Metroid games into one video. I actually started working on this game script before the Other M video I did, and here we are a stone's throw away from Metroid Dread. So yeah, sacrifices had to be made. But I will cover the whole series, including the Prime games, just over the rest of the year. Anyway, we're not there yet. For now, let's continue with the NES nostalgia trip. I'll admit, I have tried countless times to replay the original Metroid all the way through, and every single time I gave up after grabbing a few of the easier to find upgrades and traversing the same looking rooms over and over again. I even tried again for this video. With no map and long generic corridors with reused assets, it's not a game that stands out to modern gamers that don't have the nostalgia for it. And even when I tried to play with a more modern filter and shoehorned map system using the Messin emulator and the Metroid Remastered mod pack, I still found the game pretty obtuse to play. And I'm one that did play it as a kid and have that nostalgia. I was sure this would be the fix I needed to finally beat it, and the map definitely helps track where you've already been, but it doesn't make the actual traversal any more engaging as you backtrack through the same looking areas, struggling to kill the same enemies again that are smaller than you and hard to hit because there's no crouch and you can only aim straight or up. And health drops are noticeably lacking in this game compared to the later games. Compile that with the fact you always respawn back at the start on death with only 30 health to do it all over, since there's no save stations. And it's no wonder this is a game I never cared to beat, despite it making me fall in love with the concept of Metroidvania games as a kid. This remaster does introduce a save system alongside the new map, but it still just saves your item progress. It's not any kind of checkpoint, meaning you still start back at the beginning with 30 health, just with the stuff you've collected. This honestly just leads to even more backtracking through the same areas, and it's even more frustrating to try and get full health, because you have your energy tanks, but so little health drops. At least it's better than a notebook full of passwords, though. I could go on and on about how much I don't enjoy going back to this game, but I don't want to belabor the point because I still respect the hell out of this game for its legacy, and my nostalgia for it is strong. Especially inputting the Justin Bailey password and running superpowered to the end of the game, which, as a kid, was as good to me as beating it. It's also how I found out that Samus was a girl. So that's interesting. But I want to try to keep my reviews of these games as unbiased as possible with how often I've played them, so I thought I'd go a different route in analyzing the first entry in the series. Everyone I see being introduced to the series for the first time leading up to Metroid Dread has said the same thing. Check out the original for the history, and then actually play through Zero Mission. It's better in every way. So that's what I'm doing. We're going to start off this video review series with the remake of where it all began, Metroid Zero Mission. As I mentioned, the NES original does a pretty good job at wordlessly explaining what little world building has been established, with a room that showcases the two bosses required to reach the end, and a death pit below that you can only cross once you're strong enough, as well as the ominous Chozo statues that hold your key upgrades, clearly being tied to our mysterious hero's power suit through some kind of unestablished lore. And of course, there's the infamous endgame screen, where the player discovers it's actually a woman under that armor, if you didn't input the Justin Bailey cheat and find that out earlier, despite the manual using masculine pronouns to throw us off the scent, for some reason. Zero Mission, though, is released with the foresight of series history on a more powerful device. It absolutely oozes with atmospheric storytelling, as well as just a more impressive presentation using lightly animated scenes at key moments and occasional screens of text to fill the player in on lore. The best moments are more subtle, though, such as mysterious symbols blocking certain paths and leading Samus to find another route that would usually wrap around to an equally mysterious suit upgrade that she strangely wasn't compatible with. Though, fun fact, if you flip the GBA screen around, you can discover that the text isn't actually glitched. It's just hard to read. So it can give you a little tease of what that item is going to be later. These moments go a long way to expand the lore of this planet, while also keeping Samus mostly in line with her power set from the original game, other than a few logical additions like the speed boost and jump ball to help mix up exploration. I also love how the environment plays into the gameplay and puzzle solving, such as one section where you guide munchy little bugs over to an otherwise impenetrable overgrowth, so they destroy it and you can pass. Or a cocoon that blocks your progress, so you find a nearby secret passage and wrap around it to reach an upgrade that makes you able to kill the creature from the other side. This game does an excellent job at showing rather than telling, such as when you inadvertently get routed around up to Criteria, an area not included in the original game, but established in Super Metroid, which revisits the same planet, and you find yourself stuck in a presumably man-made pit. Chozo-made pit? It's not organic, that's the point. With no clear exit and walls too far apart to wall jump, Samus has to take advantage of her training and still limited power set to find a small bomb passage out the side and over to a curious Chozo shrine holding a never-before-seen item that allows Samus to grab ledges. Why she needs an item to make her hands grip better is beyond me. Maybe she has early onset arthritis from years of bounty hunting, but that's beside the point. When you return to the previous room, a large pillar rises up with platforms you have to grip that lead out of the pit. The whole thing ends up feeling like it was placed there specifically for Samus, some kind of item training ground left long ago by her Chozo ancestors in case she ever returned. It's these key moments that say a lot without actually saying anything. And all that is even without getting into the new epilogue to the game, which I want to save for its own section, as it varies drastically from anything we've gotten from a Metroid game. Except maybe what's to come in Metroid Dread. The Emmy seems suspiciously reminiscent, but we'll get to that. The individual moments of this game might be incredible, but the total explorative package doesn't always hit the mark. Metroid, as a series, is famous for its non-linear exploration, where there's one set path to the next item, but plenty of side paths to find hidden power-ups, optional upgrades, shortcuts back to another area, or sometimes just dead ends saying, hey, you can't go here yet, but remember it for later. But with Zero Mission, it feels especially bad at routing players through an entire section of a planet for one item, and then sending you right back to where you just came from, which really feels like they're just padding the playtime for those that don't sequence break. There's an especially egregious section when you first get introduced to Norfair, as you do the route from Brinstar to Norfair back and forth at least 3 times, with very little deviation since there's not much in the way of shortcuts between the two. Each path has a few new power-ups you can get that you didn't have the upgrade for before, but it's still a tedious slog that really slows the game down, up and down the elevator over and over again. I'd imagine it's even more annoying in the original game, as there's even less guidance on where the next item is, but there's also fewer power-ups in that one, so it probably cuts down a few of the routes at least. When you are left to just freely explore an area, though, it's mostly great. There's still some obtuse rooms where you are expected to pretty much bomb everything to find the right path through, but for the most part, all the actual paths are highlighted in some way, such as cracked blocks or an empty space in the wall, whereas optional power-ups are rightfully harder to find, sometimes just cheaply buried in a single block, and other times slightly off the main path into a secret room. Sometimes these are brilliantly concealed and the environment will give you some hints, such as seeing a room from one side but not being able to access it, and then realizing you have to enter from a room on the other side and just bomb the crap out of that room. But there's a few collectibles that I just gave up on because they require ridiculous specialty skills that were previously only used for speedrunning and sequence breaking. The Morph Ball Shine Spark, for example, is a move that I don't think should be required for actual item collection. It should just be there for those that can pull it off to assist with their item skips and speedruns. This game sometimes feels like it punishes players that weren't experts at speedrunning Super Metroid for the past 10 years, leading up to this release. And that's coming from someone that's still pretty good at running this game. Not so much sequence breaking, but being able to efficiently navigate most areas, or take out bosses pretty quickly, that kind of thing. My end time was really only hurt by my screwing around trying to do things like figure out the Morph Ball Shine Spark, for example. I will give this game credit for at least marking every item room, unlike Super Metroid, but because there's so many hidden paths not on the map, you still don't know where items are until you actually find the room they're in. So some of those more obtuse sections can be extra annoying because there's nothing like Super Metroid's X-ray visor that can facilitate the confusion. Though I guess you could argue that power bombs fill that role since they now reveal what kind of destroyable block is in the room, but they're also a very limited quantity that you don't get until it's basically too late to need them. Map complaints aside, this game goes a long way to make the base map of Metroid 1 drastically more interesting, and also expand a bunch of areas thanks to including new items like the aforementioned speed boost and the super missiles into the main game, as well as everything you get after where that original game ended. But it also feels slightly hindered by adhering to that map structure, because there's still a lot of long corridors and samey hallways to explore, and it makes it pretty obvious which parts of the map are expanded because of how different their layouts are than the areas people are most familiar with from the NES version. I think the idea here was to scratch the nostalgia first, hence the opening areas being a pretty faithful recreation, and then expand and improve later, such as adding new boss encounters and an entire post-game addition. But I think I've danced around that element enough, so let's get right into it. The original Metroid had a fairly basic concept. The Federation's best space hunter, Samus Aran, is sent to the Chozo home planet of Zebes to eradicate the Metroid threat before the space pirates can breed them, and also take out their leader, Mother Brain. There's very little known about Samus herself. The manual doesn't even get her gender right, and there's even less knowledge about Samus's connection to the Chozo or the Metroids. The Chozo aren't even named in lore yet, you just get power-ups from their statues. And there's no origin for Samus's power suit. The manual actually calls him a cyborg, strangely. Honestly, the Metroid manual is fascinating in both how inaccurate it is, and also how much game stuff it spoils, from what power-ups are in the game to specific info on enemies and bosses. It also includes a map. It's not really useful at all, but it's there. Though, honestly, the manual is the only way you actually know what any of the power-ups do, since there's no, dialogue box saying what they are when you get them. So yeah, all that is to say, Zero Mission had nowhere to go but up. And it also had the foresight of Metroid 2 through 4, as well as Metroid Prime at its disposal to work with. So the same basic structure is in place, with Brinstar, Norfair, and Torian all accounted for, as well as Kraid and Ridley officially placed on the map as their own areas, rather than just being part of Brinstar and Norfair like they are in Super. But the way they rework a lot of the origin story into the game itself is expertly done. I already mentioned how great the atmospheric storytelling and animated cutscenes are, but where the expanded lore excels, the expanded roster of bosses kind of falters. The original bosses are comedically bad to look back on, mostly because they were limited by the scale of the sprites on the NES. Most notably the little baby Kraid from the original. Now, they have the power of the Game Boy Advance and the established scale of these creatures, so Kraid can be shown of proper size and power, while Ridley is actually able to move around in a larger room and use a lot more dynamic attack patterns. Admittedly, neither of them is still terribly hard to beat. Ridley especially is kind of unacceptably easy, considering how late in the game you fight him, since without even really trying to find everything, I still could just tank through the damage he dealt and mash missiles to victory. He's kinda like that in every game, unfortunately, but here all the bosses are kind of the weakest part of the game, as they don't mix up the formula much from past entries, and the new bosses feel pretty shoehorned in and unnecessary. Especially since Kraid and Ridley are still the only ones that count toward access to Torian. The others you just kind of stumble into along the way. They're also just not terribly fun. And there's one specifically I dread every time I play this game. Side note, my phone auto-capitalized the word dread right then, because apparently I've been talking about that game so much. So, it's not so much an intended pun, I just thought it was an amusing anecdote while writing this script. Anyway, like I said, there's one boss I specifically dread. I don't remember the name of the boss, nor do I care to look it up, but it's kind of just an annoying door lock. It doesn't move, and you can't reach its weak point from the platforms, so you have to just freeze a beetle at the right time, jump on it, and then mash away at the tendrils holding the enemy in place. And then finally, it just crashes through the floor anticlimactically and you move on. That's it. It doesn't feel good to fight, and frankly it just kind of copies the static enemy with environmental attacks gimmick from Mother Brain, but does it worse. And I already hate this Mother Brain fight, so yeah. Luckily it's not hard, and it's over quick enough, but it's still bad. The rest similarly have pretty repetitive patterns that make them more tedious than challenging. None of these guys are among the best series bosses like Phantoon or Nightmare, that's for sure. Mother Brain, similarly, is pretty anticlimactic, though she is true to her original fight, so that's more a problem with the game itself than this game's interpretation of her. I genuinely hate her fight in this game, as it's just a maddening missile mash while trying to stay on the tiny platforms, and it's just claustrophobic and unfun. Actually, I genuinely hate Torian in general. That's why I kinda skipped over it. It's painfully linear, and the only enemies are little orbs to help keep your health and missiles up, and then a bunch of Metroids. Granted, this is their first and only appearance in the game, so it's a big deal from a lore standpoint, but their AI in this game just doesn't feel great, as you can only get them off you by bombing, but they don't move very far away, so by the time you try to get out of Morph Ball and aim your Ice Beam at them, they're back on you. And then they're just missile sponges, so it gets tedious by the time you get to Mother Brain's chamber, especially with how many missiles you need to beat her after you've exhausted your supply on the Metroids. Not the best first showing for the titular enemies. Strong showing for Samus's propensity for genocide, though. Anyway, back to Mother Brain. The point I'm trying to make here is her fight sucks, and so does the rest of her home. There's no epic second form, like in Super Metroid, either, and her environment does more damage than her one I-beam attack, so she just feels super unsatisfying. Granted, in comparison, she's stupidly easy in Super, and most of that fight is scripted and impossible to lose, but still, I'll nitpick that one later. Maybe Mother Brain just isn't a great final boss. But yeah, then she dies. Then you've got the obligatory timed escape scene back to your ship that all the games have, but this is the first time they did it, so it's still kind of a neat novelty. The real surprise here is what happens after you fly off. Before, the game basically just ended, with the reveal that Samus was a girl all along, probably leading to at least one sexual awakening. Now Samus barely gets to enjoy her victory before space pirates interfere, crash her ship on the new region of Chizodia, and steal her power suit. From here, you're left essentially cold and naked on the planet's surface, staring down the space pirate dropship. This can be a little jarring after experiencing the fully powered Samus at the end of the game, but playing as Zero Suit Samus for the first time with a drastically different power set available to you was kind of mind-blowing as a kid, and probably led to a lot more sexual awakenings, honestly. Including mine, I think. This was like nothing Metroid had really tried before, as you basically had to stealth around the space pirate ship to try and retrieve your power suit and take them out for good. But all you had was a little stun gun that couldn't actually kill them, so all you could do was stun and run. And of course you don't actually take the space pirates out for good, but that's what she thought, at least. This section does play somewhat similar to the SAX sequences in Metroid Fusion, which we'll discuss more in a later video, but it's on a whole other level here, as you're even more depowered, and you have a lot more ground to cover while avoiding detection and hiding from enemies in convenient alcoves. I mean, you'd think they'd search more thoroughly, but I'm not complaining. We know by now that space pirates aren't the brains of this operation. Get it? Because their boss was Mother Brain. I'll admit, a lot of times when I replay this game, I still quit after Mother Brain. I'm personally not the biggest fan of this part because I suck at stealth, but if I'm analyzing it as an unbiased critic, it's brilliant and a literal game changer that forces you to rethink your whole strategy of how you explore this game. The atmospheric storytelling here is also on point, since the space pirates are regularly skulking around doing various things as they prepare for their infiltration of the planet, such as unloading the powerful and as yet unobtained power bombs. The environment also gives you a lot of clues about where to hide from their security, and where you're trying to get back to get your suit as you transition from the ship to the planet's surface to some really visually unique Chozo ruins. I'll admit, I find a few of the larger areas here maddening to get through, with one close to the end specifically a chore due to the annoying platforming required, and a number of space pirates waiting to catch you, as well as the fact that they hide a save point near here behind a false wall, so if you miss it, the last checkpoint is quite a ways back. Dick move. But once you finally reach your destination, it's all worth it, as you get some intriguing backstory cutscenes that do a nice job of wordlessly showing Samus's past with the Chozo, and then what I believe is the first time ever seeing an actual Chozo figure wearing a power suit, even if it's just in statue form. It's a really cool lore moment as you basically reach out to the Chozo ancestors for help. Well, I guess they're not really ancestors. Samus is technically human. She was just raised by the Chozo. Can you imagine how messed up you'd be if you were adopted by birds? What was that childhood like? I hope Metroid Dread gives some insight into early life with her bird family. Anyway, where was I? Right. What follows this is probably my least favorite boss in the whole game, but it's also the most dynamic and unique. Since you don't really have any powers other than a little stun pistol, they can't have a missile sponge or anything, so this plays out more like a series of timed button prompts that you can still die from. It is admittedly kind of a nice metaphor with the whole if you're not worthy you'll end up killing yourself thing, as you essentially try not to shoot your own mirror self. But it's still annoying and I don't like doing it. Though the reward is admittedly worth it, and at least they get an award for originality. Once she proves her worth, Samus gets re-equipped with her suit and its full potential is awoken as those glitched abilities get activated. I'm guessing the idea was that only fully tested Chozo warriors can use these abilities, which is why they were absorbed into her suit but incompatible until she reached that final test. Like I said before, my headcanon is that this planet kind of feels like it was a Chozo training ground meant for Samus to return to when she was ready. But yeah, then you get to try out this new arsenal by wreaking havoc on the space pirate ship as you make your way through the ruins and onto the ship to track down power bombs and cause more genocide. At this point though, there's only a few moments for these items to shine, and the gravity suit feels especially unnecessary. Like they just threw in a random flooded room just so you can use it. This whole part throws the pacing of the game off a little, honestly, but it's still a neat post-game reward that also helps justify Samus having this expanded arsenal in the first game. Even if it doesn't really matter since she'll just lose it all before her next outing anyway. Does the Federation just take all her shit every time she gets back? Is there a storeroom full of extra power suit upgrades that they've confiscated? Maybe Other M wasn't so off base, she just does whatever they tell her after all. Anyway, speaking of awkward pacing, after you obtain the power bombs, the last few inaccessible rooms are open and you're ushered toward a suspiciously empty room, where out shambles what I guess is a prototype for Mecha Ridley. This fight is laughably short and easy though, so it feels especially strange to end the game on it, but whatever. I did read that it's apparently way harder if you have 100% item collection, so I guess this is when you're supposed to ditch the ship and use your new arsenal to backtrack through everything for item cleanup. But, like I mentioned before, with how frustrating some of the item collection puzzles were, I couldn't be bothered to get everything, so I was just left with a pathetic final fight. But yeah, this script section has been longer than I expected, so let's wrap it up. After the fight, Ridley's eyes light up and you get another obligatory self-destruction countdown timer and need to get off the ship. So, you backtrack through the same rooms again. This game gets a lot of mileage out of this map. So you can steal a space pirate sperm ship, fly off, and get final completion numbers. The end. See you next mission. But hopefully we never see those sperm ships again, because that is just an awful design. Kind of fitting with their focus on breeding, but still. Gross. And there we have it. Metroid Zero mission is completed. The space pirate threat on Zebes has been neutralized, and the Metroids have been eradicated. At least for now. This was the Chozo home planet after all, not the Metroids. But that's a story for another video. In the meantime, let me know how you feel about the first Metroid game. Either the NES original, this GBA remake, or both. It might seem like I was fairly critical, but I ultimately like this game a lot. I mostly just have issues with the structure of this game as a remake, not the actual game engine or satisfaction of playing through it in general. I mean, the controls and movement physics feel perfect, like the best in the series, and this GBA game engine is largely why Metroid Fusion is my favorite of the 4 games. Spoilers for that video, I guess. Though my love of Fusion is pretty well documented at this point. And I think a lot of what Zero Mission does new works extremely well, such as implementing new items into the map layout and that whole section after Mother Brain, but it can't make up for the awkward map layout itself and clunky pacing in regards to reliance on backtracking. At least if you don't sequence break. It's a game I'd like to get better at so I can find more efficient routing that doesn't cause me to get lost so much, especially around Kraid's Lair, but objectively grading the map and exploration structure means the game takes a bit of a hit with how little the areas connect back to each other, and the sheer amount of rooms you have to go through over and over to get anywhere. It might have been forgivable back on the Super Nintendo, where there weren't a lot of Metroidvania games to compare it to, but by the time we've gotten to the Game Boy Advance, there are much better ways to route your map, so they really have no excuse. It's a game that plays incredibly well, and would be nearly perfect if it tried a little harder to modernize its progression structure. Like, maybe make the Chozo hint statues act as teleporters. It would also help if they focused a little less on locking 100% item collection behind sequence breaking skills, especially when the reward for getting everything is a much more satisfying final fight. It feels like they're punishing the average player for not being good enough and saddling them with the baby mode boss fight. To be clear, I really appreciate completion rewards, but that specifically feels like the kind of thing where the difficulty should just scale with your items, not be an on-off switch of 100% or nothing. A better reward would have been unlocking the original Metroid, which you get just by beating the game normally, or maybe a fusion mode, like Samus Returns implemented, where you can play the game again wearing the suit from Metroid Fusion. It might seem like a little thing to harp on so heavily, but when boss difficulty and item collection are two of the weakest aspects of the game, it combines into a baffling decision, in my opinion. But let's stop there. This conclusion turned into a ramble, and I didn't intend that. I'm not editing it out because it's very on brand for me, but still, gotta know when to stop. Thank you for sticking it out with me, and I hope you'll join next time for a bit of a different look into the next game in the series. Spoilers, I've never beaten that original version either, and don't intend to, so expect a similar type of remake analysis for Metroid 2. Though maybe not as similar as you'd expect. See you next mission. Not the best first showing for the titular enemies. Strong showing for Her name isn't Metroid. Because there's still a lot of long corridors and samey holidays? Samey holidays? Sure.